Hi, I'm Bill Blazowski, one of the principals in the Alliance for Bayway Communities, or ABC, and I'd like to welcome you to our March 2021 seminar, which is being jointly sponsored by Eckerd College. And now I'd like to introduce Kelly Kirshner, Vice President for Executive and Continuing Education at Eckerd College, to introduce our topic and speaker.
Pleasure to welcome you to what we hope will be one of the last Zoom town halls for the Alliance of Bayway Communities, as we hope that a fully vaccinated Bayway will be coming to us soon. Who have lived in the area for any appreciable amount of time, you'll know that dating back to 2016, conducting a town hall on the status of our wastewater treatment program in the city of St. Pete has been something that perhaps all of us have looked forward to every year, and very grateful that our Public Works Administrator, Claude Tankersley, has always been so amenable to come and join us and give us an update. And so we are here again this year via Zoom to do that. We probably have been doing because in 2015, during the height of the rainy season in August, there was a dramatic failure at the Southwest wastewater treatment plant that is right here at the start of the Bayway that dramatically impacted Eckerd College and our operations, as well as having downstream impacts on other communities here in the Bayway. Not only due to the potential for flooding, but the issues related to odor, as well as the fact that the city has now started, and we're going to hear more about that today, their waste to energy program that's converted the waste is a very cutting edge technologically program. And the city of St. Pete, one of the first, I believe, in the state of Florida that's doing this. And so the city has been constantly, particularly under the tenure of Mr. Tankersley, willing to come and speak with all of us that are impacted by this plant. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our guest today and the board of ABC, led by Bill, who, along with me, been immersed in this process probably since August of 2015. So you have really a great preparation for today's conversation, giving questions to Claude and then allowing for an exchange with ABC board members as well during the course of the next hour. As I said, Mr. Tankersley has been with the city of St. Petersburg since February of 2016. Prior to that, he spent 9 years with the city of Bradenton, just south of the Skyway Bridge, as their director of public works and utilities. Prior to that, he was the vice president of Jones Edmonds. Claude is a great Floridian. He is a Gator orange and blue through and through, and has his bachelor's degree in civil engineering as well as his master's in civil engineering, both from the University of Florida. So without further ado, Claude, we greatly appreciate you joining us again. We know the city is booming more than ever, even through COVID, with construction, and now we see tourism during our high season, droves to visit the new pier, and all the things that you have had a hand in over the past 5+ years in bringing to fruition. And we appreciate you giving us an update on where we are with our wastewater treatment system here in the Berg. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and mute Kelly and unmute.
And Bill, would you be able to allow me to share my screen?
I could do that.
Thank you.
See if that works.
Yep, sure does. All right. Shall we continue then?
You're on.
All right, very good. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you guys today. Kelly, as you mentioned, this has become an annual event that has been very useful for us, because it's always useful to get information and feedback from the public as to the programs we're doing. Sometimes the things that we do are noticeable, they're not. And so this helps us get some of the information out that may not be noticeable. As you mentioned, Bill had sent me a list of questions to address, and so I want to go ahead and dive right into it. And the first question was, how has the sewer system been performing since we had the spills in 2015 and 16? And as you can see here, the system has recovered greatly. We had both an acute and a chronic situation with our sewer system, and the spills were a symptom of the acute issue. As with most acute issues, there is a relatively fast way that you can fix it. And so we rushed through some projects to fix the acute situations, so that, as you can see in 2018 and 19 and 20, we had little to zero unauthorized discharges in those years. That was because of the projects we rushed through to deal with the acute issues. But there's a lot of underlying chronic issues with our very large, very old system that we will be working on continuously for the future. But we have a 20-year plan of what we're going to be doing to make sure that the chronic situations don't get to an acute state like they did in 2015 and 2016. So we're under a consent order right now from the state for those spills. We also have been working on our Kreisman infrastructure plan. This is to address those acute issues right up front. As you can see from this timeline, that there's going to be some overlap between the consent order and the infrastructure plan and the master plan that we have created. We call this our Integrated Water Resources Master Plan. And this is our 20-year planning document to move us forward, to make sure that we're properly investing in our water system, reclaimed water, and stormwater systems. That's why we call it the integrated water system, because it's not just looking at one water source. It's looking at all the water sources and how they interact with each other. As you can see from this, I tried to show how the Integrated Water Resources Master Plan is not only longer than the Kreisman infrastructure plan, but also much, much bigger. So I have here some numbers showing you why I mentioned that it's much bigger. So 20-year capital improvements over the last 20 years and going forward, you'll see that from the 20-year period of 1996 to 2015, the city invested a total of about $800 million into our water, wastewater, stormwater systems. Now these dollars are in 2019 dollars. So I did accelerate the actual dollars spent in that 20-year period with the appropriate inflation factor to get it to a 2019 equivalent dollars. So during that, we invested a little over $800 million worth of projects. However, as our master plan has shown us, we really should be investing close to $2 billion every 20 years. And in order for us to reach a point where we feel that we have incorporated the appropriate sustainable and resilient investments to deal with climate change, for the next 20-year period, we actually believe we should be spending close to $3 billion over the next 20 years. It turns out to be on an annual basis. In the past, we were annually spending about, on average, $40 million a year. Right now, just to maintain the appropriate level of investment, we should be at about 105. But moving to the sustainability investment, we really should be close to $160 million per year in investment. And the reason why this is important to show you is that these numbers are big. Well, we should have been investing in the past more than twice what we actually did. But our facility, out of sight, out of mind. Nobody likes to pay high utility rates. And in the past, we didn't have the tools that we have now to actively investigate and manage and determine the condition of our assets. And so there have been some changes in technology and processes and procedures that allow us to have a better understanding of our system. Nevertheless, with that underinvestment, that's the underinvestment that led to the acute crisis of 2016 and 2015. And then again, moving forward for the next 20 years, if we want to be that sustainable city that you, the citizens, have told us you want us to be, we need to spend almost 4 times per year what we have in the past. Regrettably, that means that we've got to accept the fact that past water and sewer rates were artificially low. We liked them that way. We got used to them being that way, but they were artificially low. And I'm going to show you something here. So see this slide right here? That if we had started in 1990 and adjusted our water and sewer rates and stormwater rates just for inflation, not based off of what needed to be done as the system was aging into the multiple decades close to 100 years old, but if we had just adjusted those rates for inflation, you'll see that we never kept up even with inflation. We kept those rates artificially low. And because of that, we continue to even have a shortfall moving into the future. It's going to take us time to catch up where those rates really should have been all along. And so this is, regrettably, I hate to use this cliche, but this is going to have to become the new normal. We're going to have to understand that if we want the lifestyle and the clean environment that we want and that we demand and that we need, it is expensive. It is not cheap. And we cannot stop investing in it year over year. So what does that likely trajectory of rates look like? Well, every year we do a 10-year rate. So we can look forward to the next 10 years to determine, based off of the information we have and what we need to do, what those rates increases need to be on an annual basis. And you can see here, we've evaluated that in fiscal year 21 for the 10-year period of 22 through 30. And it's roughly about 5% overall per year, depending on the utility. Some utilities much higher, some utilities lower. Reclaimed water, we're projecting for the next 2 fiscal years a 0% increase in the rate for that. Water, significantly underinvested in stormwater. And so we have to catch up in order to meet the expectations of our customers. We have to catch up. And so what does that mean for a typical utility bill? Regrettably, it means more money, regrettably. So in fiscal year 21, a typical utility bill, everybody has their utility bills a little bit different. But if you take kind of an average or typical utility bill, if you have reclaimed water right now, your utility bill is roughly $156 a month. If you do not have reclaimed water, it's roughly $125 a month. We are projecting that in the next 10 years, that needs to jump up by anywhere from 53 to 60%. That is huge. But it is the based off of what we know needs to be done to the system, what we have heard from the public that their expectations are for the system. To pay new regulatory requirements are coming down the line. We took all of that into account to come up with our 10 and 20-year plan. So regrettably, we do not see water and sewer rates leveling off anytime soon. One of the questions we get frequently is, well, if you're going to raise my rate by 5%, okay, but what 5% additional services am I going to see? And regrettably, since we were invested for we're playing catch up. And so that 5% increase you might see is you're not going to necessarily see a 5% increase or improvement in service because we're playing catch up. And so therefore we can't have the luxury of having extra things because we're still trying to get to the point where we have the things that we need. A question that came up also is on the private lateral pilot study. And so we've talked in the past how private laterals do not belong to the city. They belong to the property owners, but they contribute to the leaking of the system, that stormwater and groundwater to enter our system during heavy storms and to cause the sewer overflows. So we've been working on a pilot project to determine how effective it is to fix those private laterals and what kind of feedback and reception we get from the public in that program. So we had 2 communities that we chose that were representative of areas where we believed, based off of the age of the community in terms of when the houses were built with the community. So how close is the community to the groundwater or to surface water? What would be the impact of repairing those 50, 60, 70-year-old private laterals? So we've completed about 145 inspections, and we have completed 99 rehabilitations. What that means is that of the 145 properties that we have inspected with the property owner's permission, 99 of those 145 properties needed to have corrective work done to their private laterals. That a majority of private laterals in the city, and there's more than 100,000 private laterals in the city, that the majority of those private laterals are in bad shape and are very likely contributing to the problems with our sewer system. Regrettably, we've only reached 50% of our participation goal, and we've been a little bit frustrated that there hasn't been as much of a feedback or willingness by the community, by some members of the community. This is helping us understand how difficult it is to get the word out to the community. So we've been going out to the 2 neighborhoods and putting out door hangers on a monthly basis. We've been sending out notification letters. We've been putting things on Facebook and Nextdoor. We've actually been calling those homeowners for whom we actually have contact information. And that's hard because we don't have contact information for every property owner. We just don't. But for those that we did, we've been calling them and talking to them. We've been participating in virtual meetings like this with your neighborhoods. And we've had our staff walking the neighborhoods to talk to people and to try to get people to participate. We don't really know why those who've chosen not to participate choose that. We don't really know because we don't want to be rude and ask why not? Why aren't you participating? I've found is that we have those 2 different neighborhoods, and one of the neighborhood, Greater Pinellas Point, as you'll see, Greater Pinellas Point has a slightly less participation rate than Maximum Moorings. And what we've learned through our deep dive into the data is that a lot of those properties, a lot of those homes in Greater Pinellas Point are rental properties. They're single family homes, but the owner doesn't live there. The owner is renting it out. And sometimes the owners don't even live in the city, they live elsewhere. And the tenant at these locations saying, yes, please do the project. We want you to. But since the tenant is not the owner of the property, we have to get permission from the owner of the property to do this work. And we regrettably have not had that success, particularly with absentee landlords in these single family areas. Biosolids to energy. This is a project that's near and dear to you guys because it's right next to you. But this is a program that converts the end result of the treatment program to treatment process into energy. So when we treat wastewater, we basically, in the simplest terms possible, we basically separate the treated wastewater into, which we then call reclaimed water because it's been treated and all the solids have been removed and it's been disinfected. And then the solids that we remove, we call those biosolids. But those biosolids still have some value to them. And with additional treatment, we can extract methane gas from those biosolids. We've completed the construction of that project. We are now in a 12-month operational test. We're about 5 months into that 12-month operational test. These are very complex systems, and so these operational tests are needed to make sure that every last component is working properly. But right now, under this, the operational test, the methane gas, the renewable natural gas, RNG, renewable natural gas, is generating about 45% of the plant. Then we're purchasing an additional 15% from TECO in purchased natural gas, which is fossilized fuels, not renewable fuels. And then we also purchased the remaining 40% of electricity from Duke Energy. We have also, because we're extracting that gas from the biosolids, it has reduced the volume of those solids by half. And so instead of having roughly 180 truckloads a month of the biosolids that we truck off to use down to about 84 per month. So far, 5 months into this operational program, we're estimating, we're projecting that the operational savings, because of the fact that we're generating our own power with renewable energy and that we have fewer solids that we have to dispose, we're projecting an operational savings of about $1.5 to $2 million per year for this program. In addition to the benefits of not adding fossilized carbon into the atmosphere. We are aware that living near and next to a wastewater treatment plant, you are at risk of odors. And over time, the technologies to deal with odors have improved significantly. Regrettably, these plants are very complicated. They are biologically alive because we use biology. We use micro organisms to help break down and treat the systems. They're so complex. There's always going to be many different possibilities and potentials for odors. One of the things you'll hear us use frequently, we use the word burp. As I mentioned to you, this is a living system that is converting wastewater into a gas. Sometimes it can be carbon dioxide, it could be hydrogen sulfide, it could be methane, but it's converting this waste into a gas. And just like all living creatures, when they had to get rid of the gas, somehow it'll burp. Try to capture that burp as best as we can. And we will continue to try to capture that burp as best as we can. But sometimes we're not going to be able to do so. And we can predict ahead of time when we're doing planned maintenance activities that there may be odors associated with those planned maintenance activities. Those maintenance activities are necessary, they're recurring and required to ensure that the system works. And during these activities, we are at higher risk of a burp of that gas. That doesn't mean we're guaranteed to have a burp, but we're at higher risk. And so what we have been attempting to do is to bring communities, when those activities are likely to occur, to give them a heads up that say, hey, this activity is likely to occur in the next couple of days. During that period, it's at higher risk of an odor being released, and we are monitoring it. We've received positive feedback from those notices. Sometimes the notice is accepted that, oh yeah, you told me there was going to be an odor, and there was one. Thank you for letting me know ahead of time. I didn't like the odor, but at least I knew ahead of time I might see it. Other times we'll tell people that, there may be an odor, watch out for it, and we'll get contacted later saying, hey, did you do the maintenance? Because you said you were going to do maintenance. We might smell odors, but we didn't smell any odor. Well, we did the maintenance, but we didn't have the release of gas. But we feel it's better to go ahead and notify you ahead of time just in case. How do we control the odors? In multiple ways. We always control the odors, particularly where the raw sewage enters the plant. And we do this using physical methods to capture that gas and to clean it and remove the odors from it. Where appropriate, we will actually cover and enclose our facilities so that gas is then enclosed in a cover so that it has less opportunity to escape. There are some facilities which we cannot enclose. They must be open in order to have the oxygen exchange necessary for them to work. So those facilities, such as the aeration basins, actually have misters that spray a masking agent similar to Febreze to mask the odors, to deal with the odors as they're in the air and remove them chemically. And then the biosolids building itself has its own dedicated biological odor filter. We've also added an uninterruptible power supply to that methane system, because the reason for that is because whenever we might lose power, which we do sometimes with Duke Energy, might have a glitch and we lose power. During that power loss, we may have a few seconds when we're transitioning from Duke power to our on-site generators. During that few second period, we can have a burp. So we've installed an uninterruptible power supply at these systems so that when the power is transitioning from Duke to our generators, we don't have that loss of power to that specific system to minimize the opportunity of that burp. We also have natural essential oil diffusers and vaporizers called a high-von system. We have those on site, and we're actually looking to add more of them. And we're also actually looking to add redundancy to go over our primary seals, just in case a primary seal were to fail. And that's a part of running a wastewater treatment plant, is that you have redundancy in everything you do. If a process calls for one pump, you must have at least two. Sometimes you might have two with a third on standby. If a process calls for one generator, we have at least two. So we have these redundancies just in case something were to happen. A question that came to us was about storm protection. So that Integrated Water Resources Master Plan has recommended that all our water resources facilities should be able to fully function with 3 to 5 feet of flooding above the 100-year base flood elevation. Now, many of our existing facilities actually already meet this, but not all of them, but many of them already do, and particularly the ones that are very, very critical. They already meet this requirement. Some of the older facilities, such as office space on site, we may have a building there at the Southwest plant. Our office space is probably built back in the 50s. And that is low. We know that we need to raise that building up. But it is not a building that, if it were flooded, would cause the plant to fail, which is why it's in our capital improvement program, but it hasn't been done yet. We're putting the money to meet critical needs first, and then planning to follow up in the next 20 years on other areas. We keep the water reclamation facilities running during a storm or during a tropical storm or a hurricane. So we are required by law and by industry practice, by good business practices. We have all of our facilities, including the Southwest facilities, are designed to what is called from the Environmental Protection Agency, a Class 1 reliability. This is the highest reliability recommended and required by EPA for facilities like water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants. And I spoke earlier about redundancy. This is where that redundancy comes in. That's what makes a plant reliable. You can't really have multiple plants and use one of them while the other two sit idle until you need them. That you can't afford to do that, and that's not good for the equipment. So if we can't have multiple plants, then we need to have multiple facilities and processes and pieces of equipment within the plant. And so as you can see here, we have to have a minimum of 2 equal-sized tanks for each process. And the process should be able to work and must be designed to work with one of those tanks down. And redundancy in terms of power and mechanical needs. We have to have backup power for the entire plant. We actually have backup power for the backup power for all the critical processes in the plant. But what is the risk of a sewage plant completely failing? It is possible, but very unlikely, that a sewage plant would completely fail. They are designed to be strong. But as with most strong is their weakest process, which is why each process is designed with redundancy. Each process is designed with reliability, because as I mentioned, it's impractical to duplicate plants because they're very big and very, very expensive in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's very practical to design and duplicate backup processes within each plant. So while it's very, very, very unlikely to have an entire plant go down, it is more likely to have a single process go down. And that's why we have the redundancy. But there are times when that single process goes down and the redundancy is not enough. And that's when we would have. So our 20-year program is to make sure that the redundant systems we have in place for our plants are appropriate to handle a bad case scenario. I do also want to point out that it's not necessary for a community to have multiple treatment plants. We have 3 plants. We have 3 treatment plants. But there are many facilities, many cities that only have 1 to treat the entire city. Some of them you'll be surprised. Boston, Detroit, Tampa, Washington, D.C., all 1 plant, period. Everything in that entire community goes to that 1 plant. We have 3. Some of our closer neighbors like Tampa, Sarasota, and Bradenton also have 1 plant. 1. Tampa has 1 plant. We have 3. So are those 3 plants connected? They are not directly connected to each other. In other words, we cannot, once the wastewater reaches the southwest plant, we cannot at that point direct it and pump it all the way either to the northwest or northeast. We do not have that capability. And that capability is actually be very expensive. We studied it. The Integrated Water Resources Master Plan looked at what would it take to directly connect all 3 plants to each other. We studied it as it's very expensive. And so we stepped back and said, well, what can be done to affect the same solution without necessarily this in the same manner that'd be so expensive? And that what we're looking to do is to connect each collection system, the actual treatment plant, but the collection system that treatment plant serves. We're moving forward to make sure that those collection systems have some connection. We already have 1 connection that's already in place, and that is what we call our flow control structure number 2. And that allows us to, in a unidirectional manner, transfer flows from the northeast basin to the southwest basin. When the northeast basin might be giving a heavier rainfall than southwest, we can balance the flows by transitioning those flows from northwest to southwest. We have a project that is completed design. We've selected a contractor and we're negotiating a contract for the project, and we anticipate it's called Lift Station 87, and we anticipate completion in 2022, next year. And this will be a project that'll allow bi-directional transfer. So not just in one direction, but in both directions, a bi-directional transfer of flows between the southwest and northwest collection basins. So that way, if either of those basins with a heavier flow, then we can help reduce the stresses on those basins by transferring parts of those flows between the 2 stations to balance the system out. We have selected what we call a worst place planning scenario. We cannot, honestly, I showed you how much we're anticipating these rates are going to be in the future. It's not cheap. There's no way that we could design a system to withstand any and all possible negative thing that could happen to us. There's just no way. We wouldn't be able to pay for it. So we had to decide what would be our level of service that we would design our system to handle, so that we would have a great confidence that if we had a storm that was less than a certain handle it. And so in 2018, City Council chose a 7-inch 24-hour rainstorm. And that actually happens to be the same kind of rainstorm as that we got during Tropical Storm Hermine. We had actually evaluated a 2-inch, 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, and a 7-inch. City Council selected the 7-inch. So this reliability worst case planning scenario means that our system should be able to successfully handle any storm that is less than a 7-inch 24-hour rain. Anything greater than a 7-inch 24-hour rainstorm, we may still be able to manage, because these are not static systems. They are operated by very talented people. And when you put the human factor in there, those talented people can make a static system perform on a short-term basis better than it was designed to do. But for pure design purposes, our 20-year program has looked at a system that would handle a 7-inch 24-hour storm. Again, that's equivalent to what we saw during Tropical Storm Hermine. Final issue that I wanted to talk about was injection wells. We've often had the questions whether injection wells are safe or not. And we use injection wells. I want to be very, very, very clear here. We use injection wells to dispose of excess reclaimed water when our supply of that reclaimed water exceeds the daily customer demands. It is absolutely 100% physically impossible by the laws of nature and physics for us untreated sewage into the injection well. The injection wells are not connected to our system in such a way that untreated sewage can get to the injection well and be placed into the aquifer. What is disposed in the aquifer is reclaimed water, quality water. We have enough storage also in tanks to store 1 day worth of reclaimed water, but we have no ability to store multiple days, weeks, or months of reclaimed water. And so there are many times a year where our supply exceeds what our customers demand. And so we have to get rid of that reclaimed water somehow. And so the two options available to us by the state and by the EPA, there's two options available. One, discharge it directly to a water body like the bay or a canal or a creek or a lake. Or we can inject it into an aquifer below us that is not used for drinking water. So that is what we have chosen to do of those two options. The reclaimed water that we inject in pose no danger to the city's drinking water. First of all, the aquifer that we inject to is as salty as the bay and the Gulf. Therefore, we could not pull that water out for use for drinking unless we desalinated that water. But if we're going to go through the process of desalination, it's so much cheaper and so much more reliable to pull that salty water out of the bay than it is to try to pull it up out of a well that can fail. Another thing that protects our groundwater and our drinking waters is the fact that the aquifer that we inject into, the water in that aquifer is actually traveling from northeast to southwest. So that water is traveling towards the Gulf, away from our sources of drinking water. So our sources of drinking water are actually up here, in this area up here in Hillsborough County. This is where our drinking water comes from. Our drinking water does not come from beneath the city. It does not. Our drinking water comes from up in here, and then it is piped to the city. Where we inject this reclaimed water is beneath the city, and beneath the city is in a southwest direction. And what we have seen, because we have these wells are called monitoring wells. So if we have an injection well here, we've surrounded the injection well with these monitoring wells so we can monitor what we've been injecting in the last 40 years. And we've discovered that what we've been injecting creates this bubble. It creates this bubble because the water we're injecting is fresh versus the brackish water that we're injecting into. And as we know, fresh water is less dense than brackish water, so therefore it tends to rise to the surface, and it'll create this bubble. There's a barrier here that prevents that water from breaking through that very, very shallow freshwater aquifer that people use to irrigate their lawns. So we have measured that over the last 40 years of using these wells, this bubble has only grown to about 3 to 4 miles wide, which is reflected right here. So if you look at all of our injection wells, these are the areas where that bubble of fresh reclaimed water is in the saltwater aquifer beneath us. And you can see roughly how far that bubble is extended over the last 40 years. And because the water nests, you'll see the bubble is actually somewhat elongated as the groundwater naturally pushes this water at 1 foot per day, naturally pushes this water to the southwest. It extends this bubble towards the southwest. So based off of the information we know about our aquifers, we estimate that in probably about 1,000 years from now, this reclaimed water will emerge many miles out into the Gulf, where the shelf, the continental shelf dips low enough that from this aquifer and then into the Gulf several thousand years from now. Another advantage of having this monitoring well right here is that we monitor not only the location of the bubble, but we take regular samples of the quality of this water. And for the last 40 years, all of those samples have shown that this water has actually is even in better quality than when we inject it. So we inject what we call reclaimed water, and reclaimed water has a small amount of nutrients in it. By nutrients, I mean nitrogen, small amounts of nitrogen, which is a fertilizer. But the process of it being injected and the living organisms, believe it or not, there's living organisms, bacteria and such down in the aquifer. Those living organisms feed off of the nitrogen and remove it, so that by the time that water that has been injected get to the monitoring wells, that nitrogen has been removed. And so we have, and we will continue to monitor this water to show that the water we are injecting is actually freshening and improving the aquifer, not degrading the aquifer at all. To go through those questions, Bill, thank you so much for sending those questions to me. I hope I haven't bored you guys too much, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on these issues or anything else.
Well, Claude, I'd like to right off the bat, thank you for an excellent presentation. You took those questions head on, and you provided us with some very specific information that I think is important for people to realize. I guess the one general question that I'd have, and to get your opinion on, especially when you talked about the private laterals, that's an issue. But another issue is, how do we make sure for the next 20 years we have people in your position and in the city who are willing to continue spending the kind of money that you're talking about in order to make sure that we solve the problem? I mean, it's happened before, and what's happened is that people decided not to spend the money. How do we, what's the magic way that we can make sure that this continues?
There's no way to guarantee it'll continue, because we have no mechanisms in government to require future councils to spend money. As you know, we go through an annual budget process, and we have no mechanisms that allow us to require councils 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to spend the money that we think needs to be spent. So there's no way to guarantee it. The best way is to make sure that we constantly talk about this 20-year master plan, which we will, as long as I'm here. I mentioned to you that we do an annual rate study. Every time we do that annual rate study, it gives us that chance to talk about our capital improvement plan. We are also going to make sure that we update that plan on a regular basis. I have recommended that the plan is updated at a minimum of every time. And I hope that by being outspoken about it and talking about it, putting into the public record that this is what's necessary, that once I retire and whoever comes, from behind me will have that foundation built, that they can just take that plan and take that vision and continue to move forward with it. But unfortunately, as I said, there's no guarantee at all.
Well, maybe an answer to the question is, it's just as much up to us to make sure that doesn't happen as it is up to you or whoever your successor is. We need to continue to promote the communications like today, so that people appreciate what it's going to take for us to be responsible in this area. So the other questions that others might have, Ken or Jean or Dell?
I'd like to ask you about the odor issue, Claude. You've given a great explanation of why it exists. Is it likely to improve in the years ahead or stay about the same?
We hope it's going to improve, because that's our desire, to hope, to continue to look for ways to improve it. As technology increases and as processes increases, we hope it'll improve. Again, I cannot, these are very, very, very complex systems. And we're so close to everybody around us that it's really, really, really difficult. If something has a little burp, it's really difficult to keep it from leaving the plant property. But as long as I'm here, and as long as people follow the 20-year plan that we've developed, we'll continue to address it and find ways to improve on it. So for instance, in the list of things that I showed you that we're doing, some of those things are things that were added very recently, like within the last year. They weren't added as part of the biosolids program. They weren't added as part of the system expansion program. They were added within the last year as we learn more things and we discover more technology to find ways to improve the system.
Other questions?
Of the period of the consent order, Mayor Kreisman's administration will be termed out, and then the others. The number that I'm remembering initially was a $320 million investment, and where does that stand? And I think, you eat an elephant by taking one bite at a time. And so to Bill's last question was, how do we make sure investments? So I think if we went back originally to the consent order, that it was around the magnitude of 320 million. Where are we with that? Has that been actually moved back, dialed back some? Because I did not see that in any of the slides.
No, I failed to put it in the slide, so thank you for the question. So 5 years ago, we came up with the Kreisman Infrastructure Plan with a series of defined projects that we knew should happen. And at that time, we cost to accomplish those projects. We have accomplished close to 75% of those projects. The lift station 87 that I mentioned is the last big one. That's the last big project. And so we've done a good job of actually doing the projects we promised we would do. The good news is that we overestimated how much it was going to cost. And so while we have accomplished what we said we were going to accomplish, it didn't end up costing us yet the 320 to 250. That's a good thing, because that means that we don't have to raise rates so high.
Right.
And we don't always get that good luck of estimating a cost high and actually coming in low. That doesn't always happen. So we hope that will continue to happen in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Claude?
Maybe one more, Claude, just on, there is a lot of conversation on equity, and in particular, you look at the redevelopment of the Trop site 3 decades ago, particularly as it relates to South St. Pete and reintegrating that site. And we talked a lot about, things like a sales tax being a regressive tax because it hits everyone equally. What is the conversation at City Council and maybe nationwide when you look at the neglect that really these types of wastewater systems have had for many, many administrations by not making the investments? And then we're putting the perhaps poor members of our community that might have larger families that are consuming more water than perhaps the baby boomers that are retiring here and living in a condo that they may only spend 6 months in, that would have the means to pay more. How does that play out? And are there conversations on how do we try to address, a 4.5% to 5% annual increase? And when does that get to a point that really becomes burdensome for families that are living close to or below the poverty line?
Yes. So these conversations are constant and challenging. In some ways, we have our hands tied behind our backs as to what we can legally do. So these utility systems are set up under federal and state laws, not local laws, not city laws. We are allowed as a city, by federal and state laws to have a utility. But in order to have that utility, we're required by law to treat all users, all customers the same. What's defined is that everybody pays the same rate for the same usage. So if you use 1,000 gallons of water and you're retired on $1 million a year, or you use 1,000 gallons of water and you're an 18-year-old kid who doesn't have any skills,
Right.
Regardless of those differences in your lifestyles, you're still using 1,000 gallons of water. And so we are required by law to charge the same rate to both customers. That's why the conversation is a challenge. So it doesn't mean we're ignoring it. What it means is that we are trying to find other ways to provide relief to those who may not be able to afford it without using rate dollars, without using the money that people pay when they pay their sewer bill.
Right.
So that means we have to turn to other sources of money, grants, people. We have a volunteer program. We hope everybody uses on your water and sewer bill. You have the opportunity to round that water and sewer bill up to the nearest dollar. And those extra cents that you pay, we put aside that then can be used to help those who are struggling to pay their water and sewer bills. We're also looking at ways of perhaps using other sources of incomes, other revenues to offset and balance that out. But it's a problem throughout the United States. In part, these utility rate laws are written, and we at the local level have no ability to change the way those things are written.
Great.
Is there any hope, Claude, that the infrastructure funding that we might see in the next year or so will include funding for wastewater systems?
I believe so, yes. From what I've seen in the discussions that have been happening for many years. If you look back at previous administrations, 15 years have talked about infrastructure. We just haven't been able to really get it done. But if it's able to get done, then I do believe it'll include some money for wastewater. Now, here's the challenge. When the United States went through its Clean Water Act back in the 70s, the federal government at that time decided to provide grant money, which means it's money that you don't have to pay back. It's not a loan, it's a grant. And the federal government poured millions and billions of dollars into communities to help them with their systems without requiring the communities to pay that money back. That approach, and I do not see that approach being used anytime soon. So my gut feeling is that while the money will become available from the federal and state governments, it'll be on a loan basis, which means we have to not only pay it back, but we have to pay it back with interest. There's already a program called the State Revolving Loan Fund that is available to us to use, that we have sometimes used. But we have found, our very smart people in our finance department have found that recently it's been cheaper to market than it is to borrow money through the federal and state government. So I do believe money will become available, but it'll become available as a loan, which means we have to pay it back.
And you pay it back by rates.
You pay it back by rates.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Honestly, I really think the days of super low utility rates are long behind us and won't ever come back. They were artificial. They were artificial. We pumped quote unquote free money from the federal government into the local communities to clean up their environments. But then the local communities, because they didn't have to pay for it themselves, they didn't, it was going to make cost to maintain it and keep it going. I'm not criticizing the local communities, but we didn't build it, so we didn't anticipate how much it was going to cost to keep it going, and we failed to do so. Now it's going to be on us to do so.
Okay. Any other questions for Claude? Gene, I think you're on mute.
I see. Yeah, there we go. I have one. Like the laterals, Claude. All right. Now we have 120 units here. It'd probably be a good idea for our laterals to be checked, would it not?
Yes, absolutely. So right now, go ahead.
No, it's something that, the condos pump a lot in there, we've got 120 units. I just think it's a good idea for ours to get ours checked.
Yes, sir. And so thank you for saying that. Because of the way the property laws are established in the state of Florida, and because of the way that we have set up our utility systems, our utility system ends at your property line. And so your private lateral, while it's not, you don't see it, it's part of your plumbing, just like your house plumbing is, your faucet is, your toilet is yours. And when your toilet fails, you are required to replace it. You don't come to the city and ask the city to replace your toilet. You go out to Lowe's and you buy a new toilet. The same thing is for the private laterals. They are owned by you. And
I understand.
we are forbidden by state law. I could go to jail if I take and use it to fix a private lateral. The only way we're able to do it under the program, the pilot program we're doing, is because we got special permission to do a pilot program to determine the impact of private laterals. So there was a value to the public to do this one pilot program. But we're not going to be able to do it for everybody forever. And so it's going to be up to each property owner, just like it's up to the property owner to replace their roof on a regular basis, to paint their walls on a regular basis, to replace their plumbing on a regular basis. It has to be, it's on the property owner to replace and manage their private laterals. So when you have a situation like you guys that have multiple units in one community, it's up to the community to do that.
Yeah, we're like a whole neighborhood, all of these condos.
Yes, sir, you are.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Is there a date when the laterals, the older laterals were stopped and the newer PVC came in, or who probably doesn't leak, shouldn't leak as much?
That's a good question. Thank you. So we started transitioning again, because it wasn't a public project to put in the laterals. And so, but private property owners and developers, builders start transitioning from the older cast iron or the older Orangeburg pipe. They started that transition right around the 1970s. And so we're finding that facilities that were built in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, that those private laterals are still in very good shape because they were made out of the PVC. Okay. And it's interesting, the PVC manufacturers tell us that their products have a 50 to 75 year lifespan. But we don't know that because it hasn't been around for 50 to 75 years. That's their estimate based off of their stress tests and their analyses that they estimate it's going to last that long. We really don't know. We hope they actually last longer than that, but we really don't know yet how long they will last.
Once again, thanks to Claude Tankersley for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with us today and provide that valuable information. And thank you to all of you who have attended this virtual seminar. Our final 2020-2021 season seminar will be released in April. It'll have two topics. The first is how associations can use electronic voting, and the second is environmental issues of importance to us, including red tide. Once again, thanks to everyone for attending today, and be safe.